Yeah, it's fun springtime snowfall, so it's good. We should also mention, of course, that when this is going out on Friday, so Good Friday, and it's also Passover this weekend, I'm told. So anybody marking this weekend,
I'm having people over for a fish supper tomorrow night.
Oh, great!
Traditional Good Friday fashion.
Fantastic.
I don't have a deep fryer, so I can't do the straight fish and chips I normally would in Newfoundland, but going to make some nice salmon.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm not doing anything like that. So celebrate for me, please. Okay. I also want to say, since we started the podcast in the last number of weeks, a lot of new listeners, lots of obviously political types. I've had a couple current MLAs and past, and lots of political staff that have reached out and say that they've been listening. So to all the new listeners, thank you very much for tuning in, and hopefully you are enjoying as much as Kevin and Sally and myself are. Well, maybe I shouldn't speak for you guys, but I'm enjoying this at least. So thanks to everybody that's been tuning in. And please continue to keep listening. And so just before we get into the full show, so our the rundown for this episode is going to be we're going to talk about the federal budget that came out last week. We're going to talk about the state of healthcare here in Saskatchewan. That was the big topic this week in the legislative building during question period. And we're going to talk about Premier Moe's comments at last week's Prince Albert Chamber of Commerce luncheon about how he doesn't care about that Saskatchewan has the highest carbon emissions in Canada per capita. So, but before we get to that, Kevin, you were talking about the Conservative Party leadership race just before we went on air. You read quite an interesting tweet back and forth from Frank Graves, who's a pollster, and I think you were saying that it's related to the Conservative leadership race. But do you want to just read this tweet that you found?
Sure. Yes.
Between Brian Lilly and
Frank so Sally and I were just chatting off air before we came on about leadership race and some of the media that she's doing around the federal Conservative leadership race. And I just pointed out an interesting tweet that I saw. Actually, I picked it up on Facebook from Brian Lilly, the columnist / journalist with the Sun newspaper chain. And he's talking about Frank Graves. And Frank Graves, for those that might not know, is the owner, principal behind ECOS, a polling firm, a national polling firm here in Canada that does polling on, obviously, federal leadership races or the federal political situation in the country between the different political parties. In any event, Brian Lilly writes, the best tweets from Frank Graves, and this is from Brian Lilly, so I'm just quoting, the best tweets from Frank Graves come out at night. The man is highly partisan on Twitter, and it is the reason I don't trust any of his polling or that of his firm, ECOS. If you saw a poll on federal politics from him, would you trust it? And then he has screenshotted a tweet from Frank Graves that I assume came out the last couple of nights. Well, actually, it's tweeted at 11:12 p.m., March 15th. A real conservative option is a healthy counterbalance in a healthy democracy. Pierre Poilievre is an acolyte of authoritarian populism. This is never healthy. You are on notice. Going to make sure you are never going to lead my country. I don't make idle threats.
Yeah.
It kind of struck me that, here's a gentleman that runs a polling firm that expects the public to trust his results when they're published as to, within so many points of plus or minus with respect to the accuracy of the poll, given the numbers of people that they poll. But how could you trust anything that this gentleman or that ECOS puts out now on anything to do with the Conservative race if he is making a threat to do everything in his power to ensure that Pierre Poilievre never runs the country, never becomes maybe becomes leader of the Conservative Party, but certainly never becomes prime minister. So, it just feeds into the cynicism of the public and trying to understand real journalism versus the popular vernacular of fake news, real polling versus manipulated polling to get the results that you want. Comments like that certainly feed into the cynicism associated with with our political discourse these days.
Yeah, it's not good. And one of these episodes we should do a bit of a deeper dive into polling. The problem with Saskatchewan is that there's not that much of it, and typically, unless the Saskatchewan Party really plummets, every quarter or something, whatever may happen, the polling usually isn't that exciting. But I think like the Sask Party, we typically used Angus Reid as kind of like the benchmark. But it would be very unusual for somebody like him or somebody from his organization, who I think people look at as a very, reputable polling firm. It would be very peculiar if they came out and started, sending off tweets like that. Reputation-wise, it's not a good look. Sally, what's your take?
You've got to, almost think of it like journalists as well. Obviously, if you're writing an op-ed is one thing. Ecos is a respected firm and has been used a lot and for a while now. But the fact is, the polling is not a static thing. You can shape the questions in the ways you want to get certain results. And so I'm quite surprised that it's not the first time I think Frank Grays has said something partisan, but that one does seem to be pretty over the line. And so, it's from a business standpoint, and certainly, for the whole kind of polling industry, not a good look.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sure that there'll be more to come on that, or people will just keep tweeting about it at each other on Twitter as they do. We talked about this quite a bit last week in the episode last week, but just news for the NDP leadership race. Doyle Vermette, the MLA for Cumberland, kind of the northeastern part of Saskatchewan. He endorsed Carla Beck today. He had previously not endorsed anyone, so she's lined up another endorsement. But still no Saskatoon MLAs that have endorsed Ms. Beck. So who knows when? Because Sally, I know we talked about this last week, but there's only a couple more weeks left until the deadline for candidates to at least get in the race. Is that correct? So running out of time.
That's right. Here. And you might see some MLAs, particularly there's a few new ones in Saskatoon, deciding that regardless of how this shakes out, I'm going to for the good of kind of caucus friendliness or anything else, just kind of stay out of making an official endorsement, or you might see a few more people come out. I've got I'm afraid, internal knowledge of that. But it's not every leadership race that you see every member of caucus drawing their line in the sand.
Sask Party leadership race, I think there was only 2 MLAs that didn't endorse somebody. Larry Doak and Gene Mikowski, if I recall correctly. Wasn't much. Yeah,
I'd have to go back and have a look at that. My only observation on the NDP leadership race right now, I just mentioned, I had to text Sally last night to find out where I could find information on Caitlin Harvey, because I Googled all kinds of different combination of names and leadership and everything else to see if she had a website up, and then Sally pointed me in the right direction with the name of her website. So I went and had a look at it, and Miss Harvey's laid out, I think I counted 16 different headlines as to areas that she, I'm assuming, will be developing policy on or wants to elucidate further on policy in those areas, which was quite interesting. Agree, disagree. Miss Harvey is certainly taking some, she's laying out her principles in any event as to areas that she's concerned about, wants to run on, wants to lead on, and have her party be focused on. So I thought, well, I'll go take a look at Carla Beck, because it's 6 weeks today since Carla Beck announced she was running for the leader of the NDP party. I couldn't find one policy thing on her website. There's lots of, nice smiling pictures of Miss Beck and donate here and volunteer here and go to contact us here and whatnot, but not one policy position. And I thought that's very interesting that you're 6 weeks into this. You're the purported front runner. I guess she's traveling the province. I heard her say that in a media interview this week, which is good, ground level politics. But you also have to put out there what it is that you believe in. I think policy matters. So I just sat and thought about this for a minute, thinking if this was the Sask Party leadership race and there was several people in the contest, like there was in 2017, and nobody had any policy positions up, the media would have taken notice by now and been wondering, what the hell are you guys talking about? What are you running on? What do you want to do if you become leader and potentially the premier of the province? So I guess it's a strategy on Miss Beck's part, but I just found it rather strange.
Now, Sally, maybe you've heard this as well. I've been told that Carla is going to have some type of policy announcement, some type of policy document coming out in the next week or two. So
yeah, I would imagine, and I think it makes sense to wait closer to the kind of the close date. 16 policy points strikes me as an awful lot. Frankly, from the other side. I also, to Kevin's point, in terms of trying to find the website, Change Starts Here is kind of a good name, but particularly if you're a little more unknown, you might want to put your name in somewhere in the website and make it searchable in that respect. I think that also for Carla, she's been an MLA for some time, and she has kind of a record of things that she has fought for under various different critic portfolios. But I don't imagine that we'll get to the end of it without some more significant policy documents. The other things from a straight strategic point of view is great for Caitlin Harvey to list out kind of 16, well, I mean, not priorities, I guess, because if you got 16, then it's pretty hard to say which one is a priority. But, you lay it on the line like that, and it gives certainly the Sask Party a pretty good map of things to target.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, and they're working on that for sure.
Oh, yeah.
For QP material. All right. Anyway. Lots more to talk about that as the weeks go on. So federal budget came out last week. It was last week Thursday, I guess. We had done last week's podcast before the budget was announced. It's of course now been rolled out. To the both of you, when you think about last week's budget, what's one word to describe it? Sally, why don't you go first?
I mean, it's what they've been selling is obviously the housing budget. That's in all the articles. It was everything that was leaked to the media prior to it. There was so many leaks in that budget. I did CBC last week just before the budget dropped, and there wasn't really much to speculate about because the Liberals had already done such a good job of really laying it on the table. But they were definitely trying to frame it as a housing budget, and in that respect, I think they were successful. Because that's the only thing I can really kind of perceive. It's certainly what Minister Freeland has been kind of touring on. That's what a lot of their announceables have been. But similar to the budget here, and maybe it's because, you're in between election cycles, it was another one that, as a budget always comes with a bit of fanfare and everything like that seemed to just kind of pop up and go down again. It really hasn't dominated a ton of media or interest or think pieces or anything like that. Obviously, Conservatives think it's too much spending. The NDP, despite getting some results in the form of dental care and some commitments to housing, not enough on environment. But yeah, it certainly didn't set the world on fire.
Well, somebody said this elsewhere. This isn't an original thought from me, but somebody said that there was a lot of pre work done to really kind of tee it up as a tough budget, or not a tough budget, as a budget where there was going to be way more spending than there actually was in the budget that came out. So kind of like the George Costanza line of if you come in and just really underwhelm people, then you've won. Sally, just on a mechanics thing. So you talked about when you were with CBC last week for the insider stuff. Do you have people from both the NDP and the government texting you, giving you info and like feedback and stuff? Like here's what's going to be in the budget. Here's what we're thinking. For the appearances that you make on CBC and obviously on this listened to podcast that we do?
I typically, get main messages from the NDP, and then a little more kind of heads up and insider stuff from some people I know in the Liberal Party. But it's yeah.
Well, you have to get it from the NDP because Mr. Singh was the only one that had an advanced briefing on the budget, even more so than the Liberal backbenchers. So it would be a little difficult to get inside information from Liberals when they're briefing Mr. Singh as to what's in the budget. But I don't have one word to sum up a budget. A budget is as much a political document as it is a financial document. I found it interesting that what was left out of the budget, as interesting as what was in the budget. I mean, this is a party that just campaigned 7-8 months ago on a variety of things that they want to deliver to the people of Canada. And then several months later in their budget, there's several things that they had campaigned on that were not in the budget. And the most interesting aspect of this was all the money they promised in healthcare. Now, they've done some things on dental care as part of the confidence and supply agreement with the NDP. It was one of the demands that Mr. Singh had, we're told, in order to support the budget. But, Mr. Trudeau promised literally billions of dollars in healthcare transfers to help the provinces overcome the surgical backlogs and dealing with seniors care in the respective provinces and increasing wages for care workers in those seniors' homes to ensure that we have adequate staffing of these care homes for our seniors. And none of that was in the budget. There was a few dollars here and there. And then he subsequently came out and said that we're going to provide funding to the provinces, but there's going to be strings attached to this money. And yet another incursion into provincial jurisdiction that this federal government doesn't seem to care one whit about the constitutional responsibilities of the different levels of government. And I know when I sat at the federal provincial territorial table as a finance minister, and Jim Ryder was the health minister at the time, dealing with Mr. Morneau and then federal health minister Jane Philpott, where they were, again, dangling dollars to the provinces, but only if we were going to spend it in specific areas that the federal government wanted it spent on.
Yeah. Seniors care, mental health care back then, those were kind of the two ones that really kind of were,
and what the provinces were saying was we have regional needs, regional differences in the sense that maybe seniors care isn't as in need of cash in this particular province versus this other province, or mental health care or addictions, whatever the case may be, that each province, and it's the reason the provinces have the responsibility for healthcare, is they're the closest to the people in their respective jurisdictions and to the needs of those citizens. So this is yet another example of the federal government whose responsibility is to share in the federal health transfers to the provinces on healthcare, now saying that, well, we'll negotiate this and figure this out, but we're going to expect certain things of the provinces in order for you to get this money. And it's got to be very frustrating for the provinces, I'm sure.
So why doesn't the federal government, why don't they, why didn't they include that money that was expected in the budget for pharmacare, let's say, and some other initiatives? Why not include it? Is the plan to hold on to it and kind of trickle it out over the next couple of years in the lead up to the next election? I mean, I always think about election politics, and that's got to be the answer, I'm assuming.
Well, I think it also is also contingent now on getting the approval of the federal NDP. I mean, they have this agreement in place, and for the feds to do anything where the NDP could withdraw their support, I think is something that they have to be very mindful of now. So,
yeah, the NDP is not going to withdraw their support from putting more money into healthcare and mental health, though. I can't see that of oh, geez, is the NDP going to be all right if we're doing what we promised on healthcare? That's not going to be it.
No, but I think, Sally, what I'm getting at is that they may have specific programs they want to see funded. In other words, they'll dictate where this money goes, as opposed to just carte blanche giving the money to the provinces and saying, okay, it has to go towards healthcare. But the NDP have said they want a national pharmacare program and they want a national dental care program. So, Mr. Trudeau, if you're going to turn this money over to the provinces, you're going to put caveats attached to that money such that it goes into a pharmacare and or dental care program is what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Premier Moe's main line that I saw in the last week, he was asked about this last week. The first thing that he mentioned was the healthcare spending. I don't know if it must not be mandated, obviously, but the current federal health transfer, the Premier said it's approximately about 22%, and the provinces want it to be up to that 35, 65%, provincial, 35% federal funding for the health transfer. But obviously they're not there. So I thought that was interesting that was his lead. What does the budget mean for here at home in Saskatchewan, you guys? Besides healthcare funding, the Chamber of Commerce, they were excited about the small modular reactors funding. I'm not sure what the amount of that was, but
about $100 million. They've set aside about $100 million to continue to look at researching the disposal of waste from small modular reactors. But nowhere near the amount of money the provinces that are interested in SMR technology are looking for. And maybe that's going to come down the line as well as they do this research and work with there's only 4 main provinces that are interested in SMR technology as we speak: New Brunswick, Ontario, Manitoba, New Brunswick, Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Of course, Newfoundland, Labrador, Quebec, Manitoba, and BC rely heavily on hydro. So there's not the necessity for that kind of that power generation technology. But I think Sally's points were well taken. It was a housing budget, and for those that excuse me, are looking to get into the housing market, there were some goodies, if you will, in the budget with respect to a home buyers program, kind of a combination of a TFSA and an RSP, where you can put up to $8,000 a year away into a special account to help you put a down payment on a house over 5 years. You can accumulate as much as $40,000 each, or $8,000 a year for 5 years. It's tax deductible against your income, and it's tax free when you pull out the monies. I thought that was a good idea, but the biggest problem on housing, not necessarily here in Saskatchewan, but in the larger urban markets, is supply. It's this is going to fuel demand more because it's going to enable some people to be able to save the money to make that down payment, but they're still dealing with horrendous house prices in the major urban markets in Canada. So, again, when I sat at the Fed Prov table with finance ministers, I remember Stephen Poloz was the governor of Canada, the governor of the Bank of Canada at that time, was going to raise interest rates because he needed to cool down the housing market in Toronto and Vancouver. And every finance minister around the table said, do not raise interest rates to cool down 2 housing markets, including the Ontario finance minister and the BC finance minister. The BC finance minister gave a talk about how he had checked into City Hall in Vancouver, and there was some 80,000 applications on the desks of bureaucrats at City Hall for building development, just sitting there. So he said, this is not a problem with respect to cooling down a housing market because of extraordinary demand. It is a supply issue. And when you've got municipal bylaws or municipal processes stopping the development of housing, that's what's exacerbating the housing problem in those major urban markets in Canada. So, I was glad to see the federal government put some things in place to try to assist, particularly young folks in buying their first house. But they've also got to deal with the municipal governments on what's restricting the supply of housing.
Yeah. Well, and I think on the housing topic, you guys are both right. Yeah, it was the housing budget, but here in Saskatchewan, houses just, you can afford to buy a house. Generally speaking, especially compared to the Torontos and the Vancouvers, where the average home price in Saskatoon, I was told today, is $340,000 and Regina is $264,000. So, Saskatoon they have some issues with inventory and supply is just not meeting demand, but it just in terms of overall affordability. That's why I think that this, the federal budget doesn't really speak so much to people in Saskatchewan, generally speaking, because it's not a crisis here, at least not yet, especially in terms of price. Sally, does that ring true to you?
Yeah, a little bit. We're certainly better off than, say, friends of mine in more urban centers of the country. But you say it's not a crisis yet, and it would be certainly great if we didn't get there. right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, how do you stop it is by looking at these things more forward looking, not waiting until, 5-10 years from now where all of a sudden we find ourselves in the same place. We want to grow as a province here in Saskatchewan, and then you have to have a level of housing, and certainly affordable housing, that goes along with that. If we simply can't grow if you don't have that, or if we do, then you end up in the similar place that just nobody can afford to buy. Renting is still really high in Saskatchewan. I mean, that's all across the country as well. You talk about homeowners, but there's still a lot of renters. That's a challenge as well, particularly as everything is getting way, way, way more expensive: groceries, gas, and everything else. I mean, I didn't see this as a real, you mentioned the SMRs, but other than that, there was, not a lot of regionalism in the budget, I guess, is sometimes you see. I think you find that a little more in elections, where it's kind of, a goodie for you here in the East and something for Quebec and everything like that. I didn't find it that kind of regionally broken down as it is sometimes.
Well, that's an interesting observation. No, very interesting. Okay, well, yeah. Overall, I think Sally, I think you said this. A week later, people are still not really talking about it. So, kind of like the Saskatchewan budget a few weeks back. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and I guess that is typical of kind of budgets in between the election cycle. I think that when you get the one kind of the budget prior to an election, it usually kind of makes a bit more of a splash. Right.
Okay. Well, we'll see what happens with housing. I think there's still. I was told today by Samantha Cron with the Realtors Association that they're still looking through it, and there might be some interesting / concerning things that were tucked in there, but maybe more to come on that. Could be interesting. So anyway. Closer to home, Saskatchewan legislature question period stuff this week. Big focus on healthcare, and just for people listening and for the both of you, most of my time when I worked at the Ledge was in health. So I'm not surprised to see health issues come up again in the Ledge, but particularly this week, it seemed like there was a lot of focus on it. There's been lots in the news as well, you guys, as I'm sure you've seen. Just kind of general commentary about the state of healthcare in the province, whether that's concern about the number of doctors, burnout with nurses. Tracy Zambori, who's the president of SUN, the nurses union, she was on CBC last night, basically saying that nurses who are concerned about, particularly coming out of the pandemic, she's concerned that nurses have been essentially muzzled, and that perked my ears up, because first of all, nobody wants to see that happening, but also there's obviously politics involved. So, any thoughts on the state of the healthcare system? Obviously, lots of concern coming out of the pandemic. That obviously there's burnout, but I was personally quite dismayed to see that people are talking about how there isn't doctors in the province anymore. When of course there's been 1,000 more doctors since the Sask Party came in, which I was
some time ago. So if you look at how many doctors there are since. Yeah. Them versus, say, year over year, or in the past 2 years or 3 years since right before the pandemic or adverse. So I know that's a line the Sask Party loves to use, but that's been some time now. Saying that we've grown, in 20 years is different than saying we have more doctors now than we did last year.
Yeah. Yeah, but the line always goes back to, right, and it is true that. Okay, now it's been over. Yeah, you're right. Over 15 years, but the Sask Party folks, they always like to use the line of during the NDP, the province lost several hundred. So I don't know. I would just to dig a little deeper on Tracy Zambori's comments. I'm thinking about my time when I was in the health minister's office. if something like this came up in question period, it would be very, very frustrating. For the simple reason is that first of all, it's concerning, but it's not the health minister. If these things are happening, the health minister isn't the one who's on the floor of hospitals telling nurses that they need to stop tweeting or stop Facebooking or stop commenting. So I think politically, who knows if this would get any traction, but it was kind of annoying, not annoying, but concerning to see that because of how our system works.
Well, I think that, let's look at the facts. And there are more doctors working in the province of Saskatchewan today than there were when the Sask Party took over government. There's more nurses working in the province today than there were when the Sask Party took over government. And we're talking a number of years now. I acknowledge that. There's more people in the province, so I acknowledge that. Yep. But I was always faced with, during record revenues, every single year leading up to the Sask Party becoming government, there was record revenues in government. If you look back historically at the revenues, every time you you gather more money this year than you did last year, that's another record, in revenue. So there's more money being spent today on healthcare than ever before in the history of the province's existence. That's a fact. If you look on a per capita basis, we rank up in the top 2 or 3 in Canada on a per capita basis for spending money on healthcare. So what I hear often, and I'm not disputing what Ms. Zambori has to say. I don't work in the healthcare field. I'm sure she's getting plenty of feedback from her membership. I don't know what muzzling nurses means, because like you said, Dale, I don't think the Minister of Health is going around saying you can't say this publicly. This is the government's position, and only the government will articulate the position. But if it's just a matter of money, every province in Canada is faced with the same thing. There's difficulties across our entire healthcare system. I think there was an op-ed published, if not today, then yesterday, by Stephen Lewis, the former healthcare policy individual who advised the previous government, talking about changing up ways to do things to attract physicians to the province and retain physicians in the province. I think that's a worthy discussion to have. And as I talked about a couple of weeks ago on this podcast, anytime you start talking about changing the model in healthcare or doing something different or innovative, you're faced with the healthcare politics in the province. And if it's not one healthcare union, it's another type of union, or if it's not one stakeholder group, it's another stakeholder group, or if it's not the politicians going at each other with respect to, you're just trying to privatize healthcare, you're trying to do this, or you're trying to do that, as opposed to having those stakeholders and those interested parties, not the least of which are the citizens of this province that the healthcare system is supposed to serve, sitting down and taking a look at what is the root cause of the problem here, because it's not money. We're spending more money than we ever have in the history of this province, by any metric. So what is the root cause of the problem? We have a large geographical base, small population base, dispersed all over the province with respect to the needs, meeting the needs of the healthcare issues that families face. So I think that's a worthy conversation to have without politicizing it. But that's where it falls off the rails, as it gets very political very quickly. And I'm not sure how you can take that dispassionate view and sit down and have a real policy discussion about a different approach.
Well, and I think burnout, is something coming out of the pandemic that, particularly for frontline employees, I think that we're all very sympathetic to and can certainly understand. But from the government, from executive government's point of view, Kevin, as you point out, it's one of the frustrating operational things is, as you say, you can give as much money, you can give record spending into healthcare and hire record number more doctors. But if the people on the front lines still feel as though they're worn out and they're coming out of a 2-year pandemic, it's a frustrating position to be in as the government, because what more can you do besides provide the resources and the supports and yet still have people come out and say, no, it sucks, I'm going to leave the province and I've just had enough.
So I didn't hear Ms. Zambori's.
I don't know what the solution is.
I didn't hear Tracy Zambori's interview, but what was her solution? What did she suggest?
I didn't hear her specifically talk to that. The clip that I saw was just her talking about the claim that some nurses in Sun have been told not to speak out publicly about their concerns about what's going on these days lately. Yeah. What's going on, Sally? What's your thought here?
So I mean, the record number of spending, governments use this all the time. We've spent more money this year than we spent last year, more money than we've ever spent in the history of life. Things get more expensive every year. The cost of running the healthcare system is more expensive every single year, particularly what we see now, inflation and salaries and everything like that. So, if we're talking about facts and figures, that's it too. If you look at kind of, it gets a little murkier when you look at kind of real dollars and inflation and everything like that. But I'm not going to say that the Sask Party is the first government to say that. We've put more money than has ever been put in the history of life into this. Well, and that's the nature of money works and inflation, everything like that.
Then the simple question is, how much more money than Sally?
I mean, it's not, Kevin. And so give me 2 minutes to put my argument. I just listened to you guys for a few minutes here, right? So, and then, before we get into the solution, and I don't have one. I'm not the Minister of Health, frankly. And that is the Minister of Health's job. That is the man, and I know Kevin would love to bring the politics out of it, but that's also the nature of running a government, is to take that criticism, both from your opponents politically, but people in the system as well. And you have people suffering massive burnout now. Our outcomes in the province are more severe. Whether we want the pandemic to be over or not, our ICUs are still incredibly overrun. We've got one of the highest death rates in the province, and people are still getting really sick and dying. And so, even if the public is willing to accept that, okay, we don't want to wear masks anymore, the government still has to deal with the fact that our hospitals are absolutely overrun at the moment. And the fact is, we've been in this pandemic for over 2 years now. In terms of the spacing, in terms of the resources and things like that. And people were more willing and able to say, at the beginning, this was new. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew what was coming. And now kind of wave over wave, the fact that there's still kind of people being treated in hallways and everything like that. And I know Kevin says, what's the solution? And the fact is, it is more money right now. I agree that we need to look in the future at different models and different ways we can kind of streamline things. You can't get to a point where health is taking up 75% of your budget or anything like that. But in the immediate, it's, investing now. It's just going to get more expensive down the road. The longer people wait for surgeries, the more expensive it's going to be for the province down the road. The sicker people get, the more expensive it's going to be. So you have to do that investment at the front end, and particularly when it comes to doctors and nurses leaving the province, burning out, or leaving the profession altogether. We're not the only province dealing with those issues, but they are issues that have to be dealt with, and that is the job of the government, and that is the job of the Minister of Health.
So every issue you just raised, there's money in this budget for every single issue you just raised. There's more spaces in the nursing school. There's more spaces in the medical school for training more doctors. There's an urgent care center being constructed in Regina. There's $21 million added for the backlog of the surgical backlog that was tied directly to the increase in the PST, or the broadening of the PST expansion, that was criticized by the NDP as a tax grab, a money grab. And you just said that it requires more money. There's only so many sources of funds to come to a government for revenues to spend that more money, unless you start cutting back in other areas. And I assure you, the minute you start cutting back in other areas, that's going to be the lead question in question period that day.
Yeah, I mean, it's the nature of the beast. You've been there, Kevin.
Oh,
none of this is.
I agree.
None of this is new.
Where I get frustrated is I just continue to hear people, criticize, and fair enough. Mm-hmm. The governments deserve criticism on a number of fronts and to be questioned on it. It's when you don't offer any solutions, and you've already seen solutions being put on the table, but that's not enough. So I always ask the question, well, where's enough? How do you know I assure you that our healthcare system in Saskatchewan would take every dollar we have in the budget if we gave it to it. Every single dollar.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the other question is, why are we doing so much worse than other provinces?
Well,
in terms of what?
In terms of death rate, ICU overcapacity, in terms of number of people being sick. And that's been pretty consistent in the last year. And we did quite well compared to the rest of the country in the first 6 months of the pandemic. And then we've been at the top, if not the top, of the rather tragic metrics for the rest of the pandemic. I mean, if it's an issue all governments face.
But it is, I think, and I don't follow the numbers closely enough across Canada. I can tell you that I was in Ontario 2 weeks ago.
It's hard to. We've stopped announcing what the numbers are in Saskatchewan, so it's hard to figure it out.
I can tell you I was in Ontario 2 weeks ago. I was fully masked the entire time I was there, whether it was on a plane, a train, at the gym, watching basketball, what have you. I got COVID, and I'm triple vaxxed. So, thankfully, I'm not sick enough to have to be in the hospital, thank God. But it's a terrible, terrible illness. And those that have suffered far greater than I have, I really feel for it. But I think if you look across Canada over the last 2 years, it ebbs and flows in different provinces as to, they had the military going into long-term care homes in Quebec, for crying out loud, to help them out at one point in time. So I'm not defending anybody here. I'm not an epidemiologist or a medical professional. I just think if you look at the numbers consistently across Canada over the last 2 years, it ebbs and flows depending on the region you're in and what measures were in place.
We've always ebbed at the top, and we're one of the only provinces that had to, while we were removing restrictions, fly patients to Ontario for treatment.
And we can get into the whole capacity issue if you want, and I can give you a long historical perspective on capacity issue in the province, but
I don't think anybody denies that the last fall was not a good situation in particular. So, no, I think we could talk all day about the healthcare stuff. This was great. That was a great segment, you guys. Thank you for that. But no, obviously quite an important topic. So I suspect we'll talk further about
Probably
it.
hit it again.
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay, last on the agenda before we get to our Hansard Hot Takes. Maybe this segment will be a little quicker than maybe we'd planned. So, Premier Moe and Finance Minister Harpower, they were in Prince Albert this past Friday, last Friday, I guess. So it'll be a week when this episode comes out, at the Prince Albert Chamber of Commerce luncheon. This is the Finance Minister. She's been touring all about the province, going to various chambers and giving speeches about the budget. I was there. I was in the room last week. So, but the story that came out was Premier Moe. He was asked a question about I think it was about the economy and carbon emissions. I'll go back and make sure what it was. But he said the news that came out of it was the Premier saying that he doesn't care that Saskatchewan has the highest carbon emissions per capita in Canada, and he said it in the context of, I don't care because of the products that we export and just the economy in general. So, as a political staffer, when he said it, my ears did perk up a little bit. I was like, I think some people will be interested in him saying that, but does this matter ultimately, you guys, in this province at this time? Does the Premier saying something like that ultimately matter when polling shows that that the environment and climate change ranks below the economy and jobs and healthcare and a series of other issues? Does it matter at all? Sally, what do you think?
I agree as a staffer. I think that's a case of the Premier kind of speaking to the crowd and forgetting there's a reporter in the room, frankly.
Well, and the NDP was in the back as well.
Carla was being a little too flippant in that respect. I certainly don't think that was a scripted line. I think it comes across as flippant and unserious as a Premier. Is it going to be particularly damaging to him in the polls? Probably not. But it is also in terms of, it does matter to at least be thinking about it in terms of investing, particularly when you're talking about kind of European countries and energy. So it just I don't care. Like I said, I don't think it's that damaging, but it was an unserious comment.
Yeah. My take as somebody that was in the room, I felt he didn't say it flippantly. He was quite serious about it, in fact, but the emphasis was not so much on, not on the fact that he was truly didn't care about the carbon emissions, is that he was just so focused on here's why this economy that we live in is so great, and here's why the companies that that are producing these products and exporting them around the world, why it's so good for this province that we live in. And, it's an unfortunate byproduct that there are carbon emissions that come from the industries that operate in this province. But no, I can understand that in text form, in a newspaper or in a tweet, it would look flippant. But obviously, context is everything. As the three of us know,
it is. Context is everything, but it's usually you don't have the luxury of it. Is why you have to think about how your words are going to appear, on the page and how people will use them.
But I think it's reflective of the frustration, and I haven't spoken to the Premier about this. I wasn't there like you, Dale, and I'm just picking up what I read in the newspaper or saw in the media reports on it. But I think it's a reflection of the frustration that people in leadership position, particularly in provinces that have extractive resource industries as the backbone of their economy, that they're reflecting the frustration they're hearing from their constituents with respect to every time we try to do something better to meet environmental standards, the goalposts seem to change. And there's more expected of us. And then there's the uncertainty or the complete confusion given off by governments at the federal and provincial level as to what those goalposts are or what's expected of you. In other words, there's a major conflict breaks out in Ukraine. People are shutting down Russian imports of oil and gas and whatnot. Our federal natural resource minister says we can help by delivering 200,000 to 300,000 more barrels per day of oil. They approve a $12 billion offshore oil project off the coast of Sally's home province in Newfoundland and Labrador, and then come out at the same time and say, but we're going to cap emissions on the oil industry, and you've got to do all these things and invest all this money to meet those targets. So there seems to be contradictory messages with respect to that. The other aspect of it was Saskatchewan as a resource-based economy, I don't believe ever gets the credit it deserves by what producers, farmers in this province do with respect to the carbon sink. What we do in the forestry industry, something you're very familiar with, Dale, with respect to the carbon sink. What we do to try to mitigate GHG emissions on things like Boundary Dam 3, the first of its kind commercial scale carbon capture system in the world. Doesn't get credit for that with respect to capturing CO2 and then using that for enhanced oil recovery that the feds will not allow now with respect to their CCUS tax credit. So they would rather you set up more drilling rigs to extract that oil to meet that $200,000 to $300,000 more barrel per day that the federal government says we can contribute to, rather than on existing fields, flooding it with CO2, which stores the CO2 underground like a sequestration type situation and enhances the oil recovery, which would have reduced GHG emissions. And yet the federal government says that's not allowed. So I think what the Premier is articulating here is the frustration with what we can do to help solve a lot of these environmental problems and still meet the requirements of the entire global market with respect to those energy producing or energy needs, and doing it in an environmentally responsible manner. And yet people still say, well, you've got the highest emissions per capita in the world. And I think he said, I don't care. I'm defending those industries and the practices of those industries in my home province that is doing everything that's being asked of them. And then the goalposts change yet once again. So I just think he's expressing some frustration.
I think that even though the opposition raised this issue in question period, it was kind of half-hearted, in my opinion, and I thought that was a pretty good sign that even they know that in the grand scheme of things, in the general Saskatchewan public, that it's not much of an issue. In other provinces, it might be, if a premier were to say that, but that's kind of my take. So, anyway.
And then I heard one political commentator say, well, he's only worried about the economy. I want my premier worried about the economy.
It's in the polling that we talked about last week. It's the number one thing that people, the number one issue, 40, healthcare and the economy, 1A, 1B. So, yeah. And Kevin, thinking back as far as you can recall, since you were involved in politics starting in 2011, was the economy ever not number one or number two in the in Poland?
Well, they're not mutually incompatible.
I
I mean, the economy allows you to first of all, provide citizens with quality of life. It also allows you, as Premier Moe used to connect the dots in his speeches, it's what allows us to invest in healthcare and education and social services and provide healthcare facilities and educational facilities. So, people, for some reason, there are those who think that they're mutually incompatible. They're not. They're absolutely compatible, and one follows the other. So, it's not like you got 4 kids and you got your favorite. You want to love all of your kids equally, and hopefully all of them have a good quality of life and are brought up healthy and well educated and go on to lead productive lives themselves.
Right. All right. Well, good. All right. Hansard Hot Takes, just as we wrap up. I'm going to say mine first because I haven't gone first on these yet. I don't know why nobody has written a story on for the Conservative Party leadership race, how members here in Saskatchewan will vote, because Leslie Lewis, she won Saskatchewan in the 2020 leadership race. Seems like Poilievre is running away with this thing, but of course behind the scenes in whichever part of the province you may live in, it could be a totally different story with people voting for Lewis. So I'm fascinated with that, and maybe next week or maybe the week after, I'd like us to talk about that further, about this issue in a bit of a broader thing. I'm just, as I told you guys, I'm just not as tapped into the CPC kind of base as I am with the Sask Party folks in this province. So, but I'd like us to talk about that a bit. Anyway. Sally, what's your Hansard Hot Take this week?
Okay, and I'm sorry if there's extra noise. My teenage daughter is vacuuming, and I do not want to discourage that, frankly.
No. Good for her.
I was actually the Parti Québécois put out a tweet a couple of days ago, and it showed the province of Quebec, except for the province of Quebec was a little bigger. In fact, their mapping included entirely Labrador, which is not the first time. I actually remember in university, my friend's Quebec driver's license, and there was no distinction on the license between Quebec and Labrador. So, I mean, that I got a kick out of it as a Newfoundlander. It elicited some fun tweets. The chances of Quebec annexing Newfoundland are low, but never zero. And so,
wow.
But it's not the first time I've seen that. It's that encroachment upon the territory of Labrador.
I didn't even know that was a thing, to be honest. I know it's clear based on what I've said so far in this podcast that I know nothing about Atlantic or Eastern Canada.
Or the Maritimes.
Yeah.
Which doesn't include
or that the Maritimes was different from Newfoundland. I had no idea.
It is.
Oh boy. Well, very interesting. Kevin, what's your answer?
Well, mine's going to sound like a bit of a commercial for the Sask Party. I don't mean it to come across that way, but this week was announced, and Dale, you'll recall it, from a mining jurisdiction perspective in the world, Saskatchewan is always, I think, punched well above its weight. But there were times over the last number of years where we've kind of slipped from being a good, solid place for mining companies to want to do work in. But we've now gone back up to number 1 in Canada and number 2 in the world. And I think that's a real feather in our cap. And this is done by an independent analysis and surveying actual mining companies who do mining operations all over the world. The reason I say that this is important is that you might recall in the most recent federal budget that they've announced literally billions of dollars for critical minerals strategy. And that as the world, according to our federal government and others, moves off fossil fuels and moves towards electric vehicles and other such non-fossil fuel type of products, we're going to have to mine these rare earth elements and these critical minerals. And places like Russia and Ukraine have large repositories of these types of things that may not be accessible, if ever again, for the global market. So, we've got, I think they said 23 of 31 of these critical minerals are here in Saskatchewan. The economic environment, the regulatory environment is conducive for those mining companies to want to come and extract those critical minerals. It's good for our economy. It's good for the push towards electric vehicles and other type of different uses for these minerals. It's good for jobs. So I just think that, again, it sounds like a bit of a commercial, but kudos to the government for being recognized globally as number one in Canada and number two in the world.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Last week at the Saskatchewan Chamber Political Forum, there was talk, and I totally missed this, so maybe I was the only one, but there's a rare earths mineral processing facility that's being set up in Saskatoon by the Saskatchewan Research Council, which who knew? I had no idea. That was very interesting to me. Didn't know that. Wow. Anyway, well, thanks very much, you guys. Great episode. Very, very good. I'm happy. I hope you guys are too. So thanks as always for being here.
My pleasure.
And,
I'm all tuned up for CBC now. So
yes, good luck with your CBC.
Have a great Easter, you guys.
Will do. You too.
Yeah. Thanks everybody. See you next time,
folks.